and joining us from Capitol Hill, Congressman Tom Price, Republican of Georgia. Mr. Price, let me tell our viewers briefly about you. A medical doctor who serves as a member of the Budget Committee and Ways and Means Committee, and is also part of the leadership team in the House as chairman of the Republican Policy Committee. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thanks, Susan. Wonderful to be with you.
I understand you were in the courtroom yesterday. So what was your reaction as you heard the Chief Justice read his opinion?
Well, it was an emotional roller coaster, obviously, with the initial 10 minutes or so that Chief Justice Roberts went through the Commerce Clause explanation and why the bill was unconstitutional, the individual mandate unconstitutional as it related to the Commerce Clause, and we were pinching ourselves, hoping that, in fact, that would be the outcome. And then he went through this convoluted explanation about how the bill, the penalties aren't penalties, they're taxes, and therefore the Congress has the power to tax, and therefore it was all constitutional. Very strange decision, I think, and then the air kind of came out of the room.
Well, as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, you probably have some reaction to the reaffirmation of Congress's power to tax.
Well, it is, but Susan, I think it's important to appreciate that what the Court has said is that Congress can not only tax what you do as an individual, but what you don't do. So if you don't do something that Congress wants now, we have the power to tax you. I think it's a dangerous precedent, and I think it's one that the American people will say loudly is not what they believe is the role of their government, and consequently, I think they'll speak loudly in November and say elect individuals to Congress that will turn this around, which is why we absolutely have to repeal this now, not just because of the health care challenges, as a physician I know well, but now because of the policy challenges and the taxing power that is within this bill itself.
Well, I want to get to calls pretty quickly, but before we do, would you explain the legislative process to a successful repeal? Clearly, you've been struggling with getting legislation through the Senate, so how would this process work?
Well, it will require a new leadership in the United States Senate. It will require individuals that believe that this is not a proper role for Congress, and it's a majority vote in the United States Senate. So as long as the Republicans are able to hold the House and the American people are energized and get out as they did in 2010, and we turn the Senate to a Republican leadership, and then elect Governor Romney, the President of the United States, as he is committed to repealing this bill, then I think we can get back on the right track of patient-centered health care, which for me means patients and families and doctors making medical decisions and not the federal government, which is clearly where the decisions ought to be, that is with patients and families and doctors.
One article I read this morning is that Mitt Romney is an imperfect critic since parts of the legislation were drawn from his own Massachusetts experience.
Well, the fact of the matter is we are a federal system, and states are sovereign, and states have the right and authority to do what they believe is most appropriate for their population. That doesn't mean that everything that can be done at the state level should be transferred to the federal level. And clearly Governor Romney has stated that this is an unwise law for our nation for all sorts of reasons, not just from a health care standpoint, but from a policy standpoint and from a taxing standpoint, financial standpoint. Doesn't work for employers or job creators, and it clearly doesn't work for states, and the courts recognized that yesterday as well.
For calls, let's go first to Kathy in Monmouth County, New Jersey. You're on for Congressman Tom Price.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I have a situation where I am a 5-year cancer survivor, and I have liver mets, which I need to have a procedure. I'm unemployed. My husband is unemployed. My unemployment is running out. And I just got a letter that my insurance, which I'm on COBRA, is increasing in October 18%. So what do I do? I'm in a really tough situation where I don't know whether having this insurance and holding on to it and not being able to, scrape enough money to survive, even just paying for my insurance. But I got household bills and rent and things,
Kathy, thank you. Let me jump in and get a response to the Congressman, and good luck to you in your health problems.
Yeah, real challenging health situation. My mom passed a little over a year ago with liver metastases, and I'm I wish you all the very, very best. I would contact your physician immediately and make certain that you're getting the highest quality care and able to get the highest quality care. I think the take-home message as it relates to this discussion is that pre-existing illnesses and injuries can be solved in a wonderful way for folks in the individual and small group market, which is where this lady is, by allowing individuals to pool together with millions of other Americans so that nobody's health status increases the cost significantly for anybody in that pool. That's the way to do it. The way that the president designs to do it is to say, well, we believe that your health situation deserves treatment or not. It puts Washington in charge of your health care, not you and your family and your doctor. That's the distinction between the challenges in health care that we have right now. Whether patients ought to be in charge or whether government ought to be in charge, we believe it ought to be patients.
Donald R. asks on Twitter, Congressman, what is the Republican alternative to the Affordable Health Care Act? Put it in writing. You actually have a piece of legislation.
Yes.
What does yours do?
Yeah, we have had for years. H.R. 3000 is our bill. We call it the Empower Patients First Act. And it has a lot of different tenets, but three that I'll tick off very quickly. One is that you got to get everybody covered. You can't have 30 to 50 million folks out here without health coverage. And the way to do that makes sense is to make it so that it's financially feasible for everybody, every single American, to select the insurance that they want for themselves and for their family, not that the government wants for them. And we do that through tax deductions and credits, advanceable credits, refundable advanceable credits, so that every American can purchase the insurance they want. Second, the insurance challenges of portability and pre-existing. You ought not lose your insurance if you change your job or you lose your job. So everybody ought to be able to own their health coverage regardless of who's paying for it, like their 401k plan. Just take it with them. We talked about the pre-existing illnesses and injuries, and then finally, there are hundreds of billions of dollars of waste in our healthcare system right now in many, many ways, but primarily through the practice of what's called defensive medicine. It's the things that your doctor does to make certain that if they ever find themselves in a court of law, that they can say, look, I don't know what you expected me to do because I did everything. And everything isn't necessary to either treat the patient or diagnose the illness. We address that with robust lawsuit abuse reform, which is absolutely vital to the economic vitality of our healthcare system. It's what was ignored completely in the president's bill.
Huntsville, Alabama. Craig, Republican.
Yeah, I've got a two-part question here. One, how can we not call this a new tax? Period. We just funded 1,600 new IRS agents. It's going to be regulated through the IRS. It's going to be imposed as a tax. It's absolutely a tax. And to not call it a tax, you're just lying, Obama. It is absolutely a tax. Now, there are several good things to this bill that I agree with. But the bickering on Capitol Hill and the inability to come up with any kind of resolution or bipartisan type agreement. Of course kids need insurance as they're going through college. Of course premiums are getting too high. Of course doctors are being sued frivolously in many states. A lot of states have tort problems. But we can't seem to come to agreement on common sense things that would solve some of these issues. Instead, we'd like to argue, even if we're going to call it a tax or not call it a tax. Of course it's a tax. If you've read the bill, which I have, which is absolutely the most overworded piece of crap piece of legislation I've ever seen. If you've ever read it yourself, it's horrible.
All right, Craig, thanks. Let's get a response from the congressman.
Yeah, I think the gentleman's right. This is indeed a tax. We talked about it at the time with the 16,000 new IRS agents that will be empowered to enforce this new tax. And how do we come together? It takes leadership. And the fact of the matter is, the House Republicans have passed multiple pieces of legislation on this and other kinds of things to correct the economy and create jobs in this country. But the Senate refuses to act. Harry Reid in the Senate refuses to even take these pieces of legislation up. They may disagree, and that's fine. That's the process. But they need to pass some legislation so that we can get together and come to the compromise at the end.
One of the opinion pieces I read this morning suggested that an employer-based healthcare system was for an earlier age in America where people stayed at jobs throughout their lifetimes. Now people, there's high unemployment and people are much more mobile. With that as the prelude, let me ask you this question by Twitter from a viewer who said, if you really cared about employers, you'd divorce health insurance from employment and allow everyone to buy into Medicare. What about that employer connection? Why does it work today?
Well, the employer connection is the absolute employer connection is a holdover from a bygone era, as you mentioned, Susan, where people stayed in the same with the same company or the same position for their entire lives. Which is why our legislation actually equalizes the tax treatment. Right now, there's a preferential tax treatment for employers to purchase your health coverage. You get penalized if you purchase it because you have to purchase it with after-tax dollars. We believe that we ought to equalize those and allow individuals and small groups the opportunity to also purchase it with pre-tax dollars. That makes it so that the purchase of that health coverage goes the way that the individual wants, the patient wants. Again, patients and families and doctors ought to be in charge of this, not government.
Let me understand how the bill works. Employers are required to offer health insurance, and if not, do they pay a penalty?
In the President's law, there's an employer mandate as well, so the employers will pay a penalty if they don't cover their employees. Now, the problem with the President's law, and we're going to see it in its full glory if it comes to pass, is that the penalty for not providing health coverage for an employee is a whole lot cheaper, probably 4 or 5 times cheaper than covering the individuals with health insurance, which means that the whole incentive for employers will be to take their employees off of their employer coverage and push them onto the state or the federal coverage, which is where it will be less responsive, less efficient, and of lower quality, I believe. And that's why we are so strongly and adamantly opposed to this law, because we believe it violates those principles of health care that are so important, which are making certain that it's affordable for folks and making certain it's of the highest quality and that patients have those choices, not government.
Washington, D.C. Sean, Independent, you're on.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. I'm actually pretty neutral about this bill, and that's mostly because I have no idea what it contains. I've heard stuff from the right, stuff from the left, but it's all biased. What I think we deserve as American people is for an independent committee to go through the bill, highlight its actual features, and post links to the actual pages on the actual bill that represent those features. That's what we deserve as the taxpayers that are putting this bill.
Yeah, and I would encourage you, there are all sorts of opportunities online to be able to find an interpretation of the law. Heritage.org has a wonderful interpretation of the law. The Galen Institute, the Galen Society has a wonderful one, GALEN.org. And these are individuals outside of the political process that have evaluated this law and determined that it is destructive, as I say, to the quality of health care in this country. So I would urge folks to go online and seek out those interpretations because it's important for people to know what this law includes, because they're not going to like it, I promise you.
Outside the political process, but in fact Galen and Heritage do have a point of view on the spectrum, don't they, Congressman?
A point of view on the law itself?
Well, they come from a political point of view in the organization. So.
Absolutely, and there are folks that believe that government ought to be making these decisions, that have opined on the law itself, and you can find those folks online as well. But I think they're not in the mainstream of what the American people. Remember, 60% plus of the American people continue to oppose this law, and they do so because they have a gut sense that it ought not be government in charge of health care. It ought to be patients and families and doctors, and that's why we are so adamantly opposed.
As a physician, what is your assessment of the most significant thing that could happen to, as it's described, bend the cost curve in healthcare delivery?
Well, I don't believe this is going to bend the cost curve. I think it's going to bend the cost curve up. I don't think it's going to bend it down, because it doesn't address the cost. But I will share with you, Susan, that I've had many of my former physician colleagues contact me just since the decision came out yesterday. And they are so very frustrated with the status quo right now in healthcare, which is unacceptable. But they're just fearful of what is about to come, and that is Washington telling them exactly what they can and must do for their patients and not making those decisions with their patients and their families. This is very fundamental. These are the principles of healthcare that we all hold dear. This is as personal as it gets, these healthcare decisions. And as a physician, I can tell you that what is coming, American people have never seen. That is Washington making these personal decisions for you, and it's simply wrong.
Mr. Price, thank you so much for taking viewer calls again. We appreciate having you here this morning.
Thanks, Susan.
We're going to take a break, and our final congressional